Please, come, sit. I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole.
I can say that.
I can see it in your eyes. You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he is expecting to wake up. Ironically, this is not far from the truth. Do you believe in fate?
No.
Why not?
Because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life.
I know exactly what you mean. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. And there's something wrong. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about? Matrix. Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window. You can feel it when you go to work. When you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. What truth? That you are a slave, Neo.
All right, welcome back to Global Spiritual Revolution Radio and Media Group here in New York. You can call us in right now at 929-477-3997. Again, beloved, that is 929-477-3997. Now, if you live outside of the continental United States of America, you can call us in right now at 1-929-477-3997. Again, beloved, that is 1-929-477-3997. We are nationally and internationally syndicated through the Talk America Radio Network out of Dallas, Texas. Now, beloved, the Talk America Radio Network is the new dominant force in conservative talk radio, and we are also a part of the global conglomerate, the iHeart Radio Network and the iHeart Media Group, also here in New York City, New York, 929-477-3997. And you can also not just call into our studios tonight to ask Dr. Pidgeon your questions, but also send your questions tonight via email during the duration of tonight's broadcast at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. Again, beloved, that is Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. Amen. And I am so very honored to have back with us the number one political scientist in America today. Again, this great man of God is a true man of God, a true man, a true and authentic patriot here in these last and evil days. Amen. And God has raised up this man to bring truth, authenticity, and light to a darkened world. Amen. He is the number one political scientist in the United States of America and one of the most powerful voices of truth around the world. He is also my mentor, the Honorable Dr. Stephen Pidgeon. He is the founder and the CEO of, according to my opinion, not just me, but also our listeners and our staff and production team here at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, the SERCO Publishing Corporation there in Eureka, Montana, we believe is the most powerful because of the prolific book that this great man of God and his staff had created called the SERCO. And before the end of the broadcast, we're going to give you detailed information where to purchase that transformational book. All right, Dr. Pidgeon, thank you so much, sir. Happy holidays, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be back with us tonight on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio.
Oh, Bishop, I am so honored to be here with you again, to be able to discuss these things that we talk over between us. It's a great honor and a privilege for me to be asked to be on this show. Just to let you know.
Thank you so much. It is a great honor. And to all of our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, again, call us in right now, 929-477-3997, as we enter into part 3 of the secret history of the American shadow government from JFK to 2017. Again, beloved, the secret history of the American shadow government from JFK to 2017. Here with, who is no longer a guest here. He is our mentor here, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon. Dr. Pidgeon, can you lead us into the mind of God in prayer before we go into tonight's discussion?
Yes, thank you again. Let us gather together, brothers and sisters, in one voice and in one accord. Now breathing in the breath of the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, and let us consider these things before we bring our petition before the Mighty One. Heavenly Father, we come before you now, really as one group, one people, one fellowship, one set of beliefs, one baptism, one faith, calling on your name from the darkness, and saying, hear our voices as we bring our petition to you tonight. And we give thanks for the things that you have done. And we take this moment, this time of the year in our lives, and for all those things around us that we are seeing and what you are doing incredibly on this planet right now. Yes. We give thanks that nothing is out of your control, nothing is out of your reach, nothing is out of your understanding, and that all dominion in heaven and earth belongs to you. For it has been given unto you. And knowing that, we give thanks for what you are doing in our country, that you have heard our prayers. So many of us have called out in repentance and called out in fasting and in prayer and pleading with you that you would hear our voices, that this country would turn and that we would turn from our wayward and sinful ways and become a country of righteousness again. And we have prayed that you would heal our land. And it seems you have heard our voice and that the healing has begun. And we lift this to you with great glorification and great thanksgiving that you have seen fit to hear our prayer, and that your hand is now moving mightily to restore our nation. For we do seek to be your people, and we do seek to claim you once again as our God, as our King, as our Creator, as our Elohim, as our one and only. And we know that you have called us to such a time as this. And it called us to stand, to be watchmen at the gate, to be watchmen at the wall, and to call out those things that are a danger to us. And although we are not perfect people and we make our mistakes and our errors come out of our mouth more often than not, and you know these things, but let every man be a liar and your word be true. For it is true, and we pick it up and we call to it today, and we lift it up now before you, and we say, may our words tonight be true. May your spirit be with us to guide us, to lead us in truth. And may you also join us and all of those who are listening to us tonight, that they might also be blessed with your presence and with your knowledge as we speak and talk through these things tonight. Blessed be your holy name, and in the name of our glorious Savior and our Messiah we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Pidgeon. 929-477-3997. Again, this is Global Spiritual Revolution Radio in Media Group here in New York. All right, the secret history of the American shadow government from JFK to 2017. A lot has been going on within our government and around the world, especially with this no vote when it comes to the city of Jerusalem becoming the capital. I really want to touch on that, man of God, in right connection to this deep state, this American global shadow government. I've been getting a lot of emails, especially from a lot of African-American pastors. They want us to touch on the life of Marcus Garvey, why Marcus Garvey was a threat to the establishment, to the deep state, going back to the early 1900s. He was deported in 1927 because of a lot of stuff that his group did, and and that he did, that he was guilty of, but yet he was deemed a national threat to the establishment of the United States of America, as penned by J. Edgar Hoover there in 1927. We want to touch on that as well. Also, a lot of our listeners have been emailing us concerning this term, COINTELPRO, which is an acronym for Counterintelligence Program, where during the 1950s and specifically 60s, those radical groups, the Black Panthers, even the Civil Rights Movement, which was, and I'm going to say something that's not going to be popular with a lot of black people, but the majority of Dr. King's money came from communist money. Okay, we're going to touch on that tonight. But let's kind of recap from from a couple of weeks ago, man of God. We talked about the House of Windsor, the cover-up, that they did not want the world to know that they had Germanic blood of the house of the dynasty of the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. They wanted to bring about an expansion of the British Empire. And you brought up a man by the name of John Dee, who was an occult philosopher who coined the phrase expansion of the British Empire. You touched on the Queen Elizabeth having 3 votes in the UN. That's powerful. And also, the European nobility, the black nobility, eventually was destroyed from the start of World War I, 31 years later, to the end of World War II. In May 1945, the Supremacy Clause in the Constitution of the United States. My God, it's so much, we just definitely want to recap. But my first question, man of God, what was the League of Nations? Let's start with the League of Nations as we are connecting these political, spiritual, historical dots together when it comes to the JFK assassination, exposing this American global deep state shadow government, the League of Nations and the United Nations, NATO, the North American Trade Organization Alliance, which was created in 1949, the European Union. Why was it so critical for the deep state, the American shadow government, but also the global shadow government to create these organizations? And does President Trump need to bring the United States out of the UN, out of NATO, and out of the EU? Specifically the UN in this North American Trade Organizational Alliance. What say you, Madagascar?
Well, those are great openers, Bishop. And when we talk about the League of Nations, it's a very interesting thing because you do have a palatable event, which was World War I. Now, in Europe, World War I is the threshold event. And in fact, they just see World War II as a recapitulation of World War I, which really took an entire generation of the young men of Russia, Germany, France, and Britain. And that war was cataclysmic and catastrophic for all sides. But it was the Kaiser, who was the cousin of the King of England at that time, and the cousin of the Tsar of Russia. It was the Kaiser who capitulated. And when he capitulated, the French, who really have no tolerance for these kinds of things, sought a complete repatriation of all the money that was spent. In other words, they sought damages for the war that they believed Germany created. Well, that kind of thinking is fine, but it proved to be very futile, and it proved to be very destructive, in fact, when it was done. And it created such a huge debt on Germany that Germany could see no way out of it. And so we had a hyperinflation event that was the Weimar Republic, and that eventually led to a retooling of the war machine under Hitler, and a recapitulation of the war to readjust the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was never signed by the United States. the Paris Peace Conference. And so, but there was an exacting toll that was placed on Germany nonetheless. And so as a consequence, we had some very interesting things that were taking place. And this League of Nations was proposed. Of course, the initial proposal came out of France. And remember that France, it's so critical to recognize the difference between the French Revolution and the American Revolution. The American Revolution was based on a people who considered themselves godly people. The Americans considered themselves to be a godly people, believers in the Messiah, followers of Scripture, and that was the dominant paradigm throughout our society. The French had been infiltrated with the likes of Voltaire and other atheists, such that when the 1789 revolution broke out, it was a revolution that exalted secular values of fraternity, liberty, and I forget what the other one is, liberty and property. No, it wasn't property. Egalitarianism.
Yes.
And that egalitarianism in France was an equal status, not an equal status before the law, but actually an equal financial status. And so it was a quasi-communist, super-socialist ideology, and it had no God. It was a godless revolution. And that godless revolution turned into mob rule, and that mob rule turned into beheadings, and eventually those who led the beheading anarchy were beheaded themselves, Robespierre being the last one to die. And so the French Revolution, even though it succeeded in terminating the monarchy, it also succeeded in terminating the ability of the French to govern themselves. And so for 100 years, France lived in total turmoil. It was only the initiative of Napoleon to bring about an empire, conquering as a tyrannical dictator, that there was any calm brought to France at all. And so this distinguishment is very, very important to see that by the time we get into the 20th century, you have the French who are nominally Catholic, but in reality atheist socialists, demanding that we set up some kind of a socialist protocol to create a talking place where we could get together on the tennis court and discuss what was going to happen worldwide. And so the League of Nations was born with the complicity of our good friend Woodrow Wilson, who was the one who allowed the creation of the Federal Reserve and the creation of the income tax. And so these events came forward, and they really spiraled into a series of events that were ultimately going to lead us right into World War II. So the League of Nations was understood that it was going to fail. And, you know, it's very interesting because we had a series of American bankers. Remember that we didn't sign this Treaty of Versailles. And so as a result, there were a series of American bankers that got in and directly funded the rise of Adolf Hitler, working with Tyson Krupp out of Germany and working with Deutsche Bank and some of these American banking firms like Harriman Brothers and like Chase Manhattan and other banks were directly funding the rise of the Third Reich. They were funding and of course Hitler was in complete breach of the treaty. He had no ability and no lawful right to arm, but he did it anyway. And he armed and built, and of course it was Ford engines and the Panzer tanks, and it was American money that was financing the entire thing. And so we had this rise of Nazism. There was a Nazism present in the United States that was resistant to French authority in Europe. And we wanted to see Germany rise again. And in particular, there was an impetus of a certain group of people, and I've already mentioned who that leadership was. It was the major banks in this country. That leadership supported fascism. there's an impetus behind fascism as well. I mean, what you have is when you see people make money in a free market, you have people who work harder or work smarter or both to earn more money than, let's say, the next guy. That creates a capital surplus. That capital surplus can be put to work to generate even more capital, and eventually you get a large economy of scale. Now, these people, unless they have some kind of ethical standard, their first impetus is, well, I've gotten through the gate into the pasture. Now I want to close the gate behind me to make sure nobody else gets in the pasture with me. I want to be the top dog. And so they're very quick to close the gate behind them. And so this is what you see with these major corporations. Well, we're too big to fail. We're controlling everything here. Therefore, let's create a fascist state where the puppets we employ in government will then run roughshod and regulate and otherwise ruin any competitor that dares to threaten our superiority. And so this is what the banks were doing. Now, you have to remember, the competition to these big bankers were killed on the Titanic. And so you had, which, by the way, was probably an insurance fraud.
Yes.
So
I'll teach on that. You have this thing moving forward with these people directly funding fascism and promoting fascism in both Germany and in Italy, and promoting policies of fascism in the United States. The counter to that was FDR, and FDR ran on a open socialist platform, and he had active Communist Party members in his cabinet and working for him at all times. So he adopted many of the policies that were being adopted in the Soviet Union at that time, like Social Security and other things. And he had the big work programs going on. But his practice of socialism is what kept us in a depression for 10 years. Had we successfully re-embraced a market economy, we would have emerged in a very short period of time. But when you impose the reins and the restrictions and the prohibitions of the overviewing state on everything, well, you slow the economies of scale, and nothing happens. And so people starved for 10 years. So with the League of Nations and the League of Nations failure with the rise of Nazi Germany in the 30s, we were once again going into war. And, of course, that would become the Second World War, which was a significant expenditure of money. And at the end of the day, the United States came out of that war on top of the industrial world. Why? Because we had bombed the industrial capability of Germany into pulp. Germany had bombed the Russian industrial capability into pulp. We bombed the Japanese industrial capability into pulp. and the British left us laboring and couldn't build anything anymore at all. So there we were on top of the world with no competitors. And so for a period of time between 1945 and let's call it 1970, we ruled the roost because Germany could only produce a Volkswagen and Japan could only produce a Datsun B210. Not a bad car, but one that I'd rather pass on now. But yes, sir.
What you see is this. Yes. Now, there was another impetus that took place here. There was something that was very significant in the winds here. And this is what I really wanted to kind of hone in on tonight, which is
yes, sir.
I want to talk about this little issue of genocide. Okay?
Yes.
And we will come back. We will come back to the issue of Marcus Garvey here because I think Marcus Garvey will present himself here as part of this story.
Yes.
But we start with really the first known genocide of a significant portion. And, you know, the United Nations has come together and defined genocide, right? This idea of ethnic cleansing, of destroying a people group. Okay. So the first major genocide of significant proportion was in the 1500s. And this was when over 400 million Hindus were slaughtered by Muslim invaders in India.
Wow.
Very significant genocide, and of course it goes unreported. Most people don't know about it. Ultimately, that genocide would become a civil war between India and a region that is now called the nation of Pakistan. And again, it was Hindus fighting Muslims. So this was the beginning of the genocide, and this precursor was unknown to the Western world, and thank goodness it was. Because once genocide got started in the 20th century, it seemed like it couldn't stop. And the point of my discussion tonight is that it has not stopped. It has not stopped.
Right.
Okay. All right. So I want to start with this passage in the Sefer. We've been looking at this passage for over a year now. And it's really an alarming discovery for us because we often go back and we look at the Hebrew, we look closely at the Hebrew. Well, there's a passage that I knew had some importance in it, which is Leviticus 17:11. And Leviticus 17:11 commonly reads, "For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes an atonement for the soul."
Yes.
Now, that's pretty round. A person could argue, well, any blood will do. I've given you blood as an atonement, therefore any blood will do. And so you see this practice of animal slaughter and so forth. And in many civilizations, there was also human sacrifice. We see evidence of that in the Incas and in the Aztecs. We see human sacrifice in the Egyptians. Human sacrifice was practiced, interestingly enough, the story in Genesis when Raquel and Leah are leaving their dad Laban, and Laban living, of course, in Lebanon. They're leaving him, and Raquel still steals his quote-unquote idols. And she secretes those idols in the camel furniture, right? The seat she's sitting on. Well, he comes up to her and says, "Who stole my idols?" And Jacob says, "Well, anybody who stole the idols, we'll kill him." Well, it's Raquel who stole them.
Right.
And so she says, "Well, I can't get up. It's a bad time of the month. I can't get up." So they go on. Well, you know what she stole in the camel furniture? She stole teraphim. Now, teraphim is something very interesting because when you look back at the source documents at that time, like some of the Aramaic texts that surround this same period of time, you find that the teraphim were actually shrunken heads. They were shrunken heads.
Wow.
And they were,
God.
These heads were, they would, and it was a particular head. They had to sacrifice an adult male who was the firstborn of the family, whoever that was. Then they would take the head and they would debone the head and they'd put a little gold medallion in the mouth that had a verse written on it, sew the eyes shut, sew the lips shut, and then let it shrink. Then they would take this head and they would hang it from someplace and they would talk to the head. They would, so this was a form of necromancy, and it was also idolatry. And
so, God.
Well, if there was a shrunken head and it had to be taken from an adult male who was the firstborn, you can see clearly they were engaged in human sacrifice. Now, this human sacrifice comes forward even today. And as we start getting into the genocides of the 20th century, we're going to discover that, in fact, the killing of the Tsar Alexander II, who was assassinated in St. Petersburg, was a ritual sacrifice done on Passover. The killing of the Tsar's family in Yekaterinburg was a ritual sacrifice. Blood was demanded in order to cleanse the land of Tsarist rule. And so this idea of ritual sacrifice, because the thinking is that blood is required in order to atone for the soul. Now, let's take a look at what the Hebrew actually says. Okay? Now, I'm not going to speak the Hebrew because I don't want to get everybody caught up in speaking Hebrew. But I can tell you that what the actual translation of the passage is this: "For the soul of the flesh is in the blood. He and I give it to you on the altar as atonement for your souls. For it is the blood of him in the soul that makes atonement.
Wow. That's deep. Oh, my God.
Isn't that just mind-boggling?
The soul of the flesh is in the blood. Oh, go ahead, Doc. This is so
I
powerful.
looked at this.
I've never heard of this.
I couldn't believe it when I saw it, Bishop. It's, hu va'ani is the Hebrew there. Hu va'ani, he and I. It's the implication is that there is only one blood that is capable of atoning for your soul. All the other blood doesn't atone for anything. There's one blood that atones for the soul. And so this is told to us in the Torah, in Leviticus, saying this is the blood that will atone for your soul. Okay? Now, in Proverbs chapter 30, verse 4, it says, this is the writing of Solomon now, right? Who has ascended up into heaven or descended? Who has gathered the wind in his fists? Who has bound the waters in a garment? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name and what is his son's name, if you can tell? Again,
oh, my.
Again, we see this really substantial and hard evidence here now.
Yes.
That this business of bloodletting for ritual sacrifice is a pure abomination. There was only one blood, the divine blood, capable of ritual cleansing. It was sacrificed once, and he said when the sacrifice was over, it is finished.
Yes, sir.
Now,
oh, glory.
All right. Now, let's go beyond this and start talking about some of the misconceptions of men and what happened. Okay.
Yes.
Next genocide on the table. Another one that can't be spoken in public because of the political implications of it is, of course, the Armenian genocide. Now, we talked about what happened in World War I. World War I was a catastrophe for Russia, for Germany, for Britain, for France, but also for Turkey, because Turkey, who had all of its oil wealth robbed by the Rockefellers earlier in the century, became the poor man of Europe, and in 1917, they lost their claim to Jerusalem. Very significant date, 1917. They lost their claim to Jerusalem. When they lost their claim to Jerusalem, the caliphate fell. And the caliphate suffered what's called a fatal head wound. And in fact, in the Islamic world, that's exactly what they call it, the fatal head wound, because the head, the caliph, had ended, suffered a fatal head wound. The Ottoman Empire, like the Russian Empire, like the German Empire, like the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, all collapsed at the end of World War I. Well, the Turks believed that the Armenians, who are mostly a Christian people, Armenian Orthodox, they believed that the Armenians had sided with Russia. And so they brought in a radical group of Islamic extremists who took over the country, and they began to slaughter Armenians and to require Armenians to leave Turkey and go back to Armenia. And it wasn't the original Armenia, but a reduced Armenia, about half the original size. And they put them on a trail of tears. And so they would force them to walk, leave all their belongings behind, and then they would follow them and kill them and crucify them in many cases, hang them, burn them, rape the women, shoot them. And they estimate, the Armenians estimate, 2.2 million people killed.
Right.
So, a very significant thing. Now, the Turks will deny the Armenian genocide to this day. If you raise the issue, you become persona non grata in Turkey. And if a nation raises the issue, they terminate an alliance with you. Turkey, of course, is the largest military bloc in NATO. Something to keep in mind as we get to that topic. Okay. So now let's move to the next genocide. So the next genocide that begins has to do with the atheist overthrow of Russia, a Jesuit-inspired civil war that results in an atheist group taking over Russia, practicing a Talmudic form of communism. This was led by Vladimir Ulyanov, Joseph Jugashvili, Leon Trotsky, Chaim Mordecai, known as Karl Marx, and so forth. This group went in and began, they did the ritual slaughter of the Tsar and his family in Yekaterinburg, and it was a gruesome death, by the way. And the guys who did the killing of the Tsar and his family couldn't deal with it. They couldn't deal with what they had done because it was so gruesome. And so at any rate, but that was the beginning of the genocide. Once Vladimir Ulyanov, that is known as Lenin, took over in Russia, he began to slaughter. And he was, I believe, assassinated by Joseph Stalin, Yusef Jugashvili from Georgia. Yes. And Stalin began a wholesale slaughter, and he slaughtered millions. He knocked all of the crosses off all of the churches in Russia, turned them into movie theaters, tore down the most famous church in Moscow, and so on. All of these things happened. And as he's doing this, he's killing millions and millions and millions of people. And he's taking all of the farmland away from people and collectivizing and moving people back and forth throughout the country and creating intense hatred. And, of course, in the mid-30s, he goes into Ukraine and takes 100% of the crop, surrounds all the farmers with tanks, and proceeds to starve 10 million people to death. Now,
oh my God.
So this genocide that accumulated here in Russia, by the time we get to the mid-30s, you're talking about 45 million people already dead. And he's going to do another purge in 1939. And so this purge is continuing. The deaths are racking up. The largest really single genocide in history, which was a genocide perpetrated against Orthodox Christians. Very important to know that.
Yes, sir.
And so the net reaction is this rise of fascism in Germany. And so the rise of fascism happens, and now we have another genocide that's going to be perpetrated by the fascists on the other side of the Iron Curtain. And this genocide is going to take a toll of what is estimated to be 23 million people. The mistake Adolf Hitler made was he put 8 million people on the Russian border, 8 million troops. And all of his Panzer tanks and all of this. And he said, we're coming into Russia. 8 million. They attacked. And in 1945, there was a Russian flag on the Reichstag in Berlin and 18 million Germans dead.
My God.
So we have seen an obliteration of history here. Okay. Now we're leading up to where we get to here, coming into the UN. In the middle of all of this impetus is what is called Zionism. A fellow named Herzog begins to promote Zionism in the 1890s, discussed among the black families in Europe, most of whom were Jewish by confession, whether you're talking about the Rothschild family, the Goethe Coburgs, the Habsburgs, whoever it was that was constituting these families, these ruling families that were in power at that time, they were all of the same persuasion. Even though they were the Queen and King of England are sworn confessors and protectors of the Christian faith. That is their oath when they take the crown. The same thing in Austria-Hungary, the same thing in Germany, the same thing in Russia. Yet the leadership was all Jewish. And they turned and said, okay, Zionism. So what is the point of Zionism? Well, if the Jews cannot remain in Ukraine, they cannot remain in Belarus, they cannot remain in Poland because they tried to overthrow all of the Christians there and they tried to obliterate their enemies with a massive genocide, and they know that blowback is coming. Therefore, we have to get them out of here. And so the push was, let's create a homeland in Israel. Now, the truth of the United Nations is that the United Nations was formed in its impetus to create the nation of Israel. That's why it was formed. That's why it was funded. And this arrangement that was made was being made with Nazi approval. It was being made with the Catholic Church's approval. It was being made with all of European leadership's approval. In fact, the whole world was in favor of it. Okay, let's do it. And if you go back and you look at Resolution S-181 that created Israel on November 29, 1947, you'll see that everything except the Arab countries voted in favor of creating the nation-state of Israel. Now, it wasn't on the terms of the 1917 Balfour Declaration, which divided the Transjordan between the Jordan River, everything to the west of the Jordan Jewish, everything to the east of the Jordan Arab. Instead, they took everything to the west of the Jordan and they divided that into a so-called two-state solution. And they gave Jewish people the coastlands and the Galilee, and that was essentially it. And even the Galilee was interrupted. You could not get to the Galilee except to travel through Arab lands under the pre-1967 division. But this idea of creating the United Nations on January 1st, 1946, Alger Hiss, a known communist inside the FDR administration, being the one who brought this thing to bear, January 1st, 1946, being the realization of the prophecy of the 2,530-year prophecy in Daniel 4 and 5. We begin to see here that we're starting to see prophecy realized, and we're also starting to see this political reality realized of what is happening with Israel being created on that date. It's interesting that it's 1947, exactly 70 years ago from this year. Exactly 70 years ago from this year. That's going to become important when we talk about Donald Trump's proclamation that Jerusalem is its capital.
Yes.
And so anyway, as we draw these things together now, we see that the United Nations was formed to this purpose. But there was some Canadian fellow, and again, Canadians leaning into British long draw socialism, which has collapsed the British Empire and which has allowed entrenched wealth to remain wealthy while no one else can ever climb to a position of wealth. This is why you see it was this Canadian that wrote this United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And, you know, being a student of human rights, I've read this declaration. And, you know, it's going along fine. It declares this human right, declares that human right. Then it declares that every human being has a right to a job, has a right to a vacation, has a right to health care. Well, you know, I don't know how you get a right to health care unless you're stealing it from a doctor. How do you have a right to a job unless you steal it from an employer, you know? And so these things are never considered. And, of course, the right to abortion and the right to commit suicide is always protected in UN dogma. So this, but nonetheless, the UN did come out and say, okay, well, we do have this Declaration of Human Rights. We have rights of the child, rights of women, rights of the immigrant, so on and so forth. All of these things are set out on the UN website. You can find them. And they defined in their articles several premises. They defined, of course, genocide. And in the opening articles, it says that certain things. You have no right, no country has the right to enter into another country during a civil war. That's prohibited by the opening preamble of the United Nations. And there are certain acts of war that you cannot do under the opening preamble. You cannot do that. It's violation of the United Nations to do it. Well, the Obama administration violated those provisions wholesale. They did it in Tunisia. They did it in Libya. They did it in Sudan. They did it in Yemen. They did it in Syria. They did it in Afghanistan. They did it in Pakistan. They did it in Egypt. And all of those things amount to international war crimes. And the only reason they're not being hauled up in front of an international war tribunal right now is because we don't recognize the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, which, by the way, is bought and paid for by George Soros anyway. So, but so they felt free to commit international war crimes. Now, in addition to that, there are crimes against humanity that are carefully set forth in the Hague Conventions and in the Geneva Conventions, and what was established in the 1947 Nuremberg trials. We determined what were crimes against humanity. Now, to give you an example, Dr. Joseph Mengele.
Yes.
Dr. Joseph Mengele liked to do medical experiments on living people. Well, let's see how long you scream if I only cut you this way. You know, and then he would do medical experiments on twins, and he would do all of these things that were just beyond the pale, that when you think about them just makes you cringe even thinking about anyone ever being exposed to that stuff. And he thought it was all legitimate, quote-unquote, science. Come to learn recently that Dr. Mengele may have been involved with Alfred Kinsey, the child rapist, who put together the Human Sexuality Report of 1948 that fundamentally overthrew the foundations of American society. The Kinsey Report.
Wow.
One of the people raping those babies was Joseph Mengele.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is, you know, we begin to see this full circle here of how the Third Reich would ultimately infiltrate the United States with purposes of overthrowing the constitutional republic and instead replacing it with a Nazi fascism.
Right. teach, doctor.
Oh, it's incredible.
This is powerful.
And
this is deep.
then, of course, to commit regicide, which is a grievous, grievous crime, which is what happened when JFK was assassinated. With the assassination of JFK, the Fourth Reich was given a double-wide door to proceed into the American culture with its paganism, with its occultism, with its deprivations, with its perversions. And now here we are. If you go back from 1947 and the importation of this Operation Paperclip, bringing the Nazis into this country to run our CIA and to tell us what sexuality was, and to influence how we're going to grow food, and to tell our pharmaceutical companies how they're going to, do these vaccines and so forth. Now, here we are, 70 years later, and what do we have? We have a continual stream of demands for, guys who feel like women should have access to the women's locker room under some transgender law.
Right.
We have people openly lobbying to make sex with children legal. You have, the propriety and the propensity of marriage has been completely defiled. The altar of marriage has been completely defiled. Anybody can get married. And the decision that made same-sex marriage the law of the land, when the Supreme Court, who has no authority to make law whatsoever, the Supreme Court decides, well, not only are we going to make the law saying that same-sex marriage is now legal in this country, but we're going to reserve a position as to 7 other sexual orientations. Okay, let's just look at this now just a little bit here, just from a pure logistical point of view. At the time they made that decision, they were enforcing lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender rights, LGBT rights. These are going to be protected, and you should be able to get married using those rights. So what are the 7 other sexual orientations that have been reserved?
See? Come on, doctor.
7 other.
My
right?
God.
I mean, if you look at the Islamic world, you'll see that forcible rape is permissible.
Right. Oh my!
Is that where we're going?
Yes.
And this is the result of Nazi supremacy in this country. You give the Nazis 70 years to rule. This is what they bring to the table. This is the culmination of their results. Now, enter into all of this the genocide that's been going on now. Now, we've all heard of these claims of millions dead in the Belgian Congo.
Yes.
Well, no longer the Belgian Congo, but the Democratic Republic of Congo, the civil war in Uganda, the civil war in Angola, the civil war in Zambia, the civil war in Gambia, the civil war in Zimbabwe, the civil war in Sudan. But what we didn't know was the genocidal aspects of what is actually happening there. So, enter President Trump.
Yes.
And President Trump issues this executive order. Executive order is probably the most significant and historical document to come out of the White House since the Emancipation Proclamation. I mean, this is huge.
Big
and
time.
At the end of this executive order, he has an annex. And on that annex, he names some names. Now, you might look at these names and say, what is he talking about, right?
Right.
But you have this guy, Mukhtar Hamid Shah, Danny Doctor. Okay. He was working with a guy named Mang Mang So, okay, out of Burma, and Yahya Jammeh out of Gambia. Okay, now Yahya Jammeh is going to turn out to be a pretty significant player in all of this. And also Gulnora Islamovna Karimova out of Uzbekistan, who is the daughter of the former prime minister. Okay? Now, he names all these people for what crime? Illegal trafficking in human organs.
Oh my God. Wow. Oh, my God.
What they're doing is, now, when you're talking about trafficking in human organs, it'd be one thing he was saying, well, yeah, we hang around the morgue and we wait for somebody to come in there fresh and take some organs. No, that isn't what happens. Because the organs have viability for a very short period of time. No, what they do is they capture people alive. People who are without birth certificates, people who are without families, people who have no one else to complain. And they harvest the organs from these people. In many cases, they harvest the organs live in order to preserve the organ in its best condition. Now, by President Trump isolating this group of organ traffickers, he's giving the signal to these bloodline families, these Illuminati, some of whom are on their 8th liver, their 5th heart, and so on. He's giving notice to them, your transplant warehouse just got closed.
Teach, man of God. That's it. Wow.
I mean, what a great move. What a great move on Trump's part. I mean, what a great move.
Yes.
Okay. Now, there's another fellow who shows up here that is of extreme significance, and this is really blowing the lid off everything, okay? This is blowing the lid off everything.
Yes, sir.
And this guy's name is Dan Gertler. Now, Dan Gertler is a deeply entrenched Israeli businessman. And he is a runner of what's called blood diamonds. All right? And they have been engaged in what amounts to a very significant Holocaust in Central Africa, okay, that they estimate has already claimed 6 to 10 million people in the Congo since 1996, with 1,500 people dying daily. Okay, who are the people involved? Who are the people involved with our friend Dan Gertler? Well, there's Maurice Templesman, a top funder of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. There's Rabbi Chaim Yaakov Leibovich in Brooklyn. Okay.
Yes.
Dan Gertler, by the way, was the unofficial ambassador to the Congo for George Bush. His partners were Benny and Danny Steinmetz, Nir Livnat, Chaim Leibovich, and Yaakov Neiman. And they run things like Dan Gertler International, Steinmetz Global Resources, International Diamond Industries, Nicanor, and Global Enterprises Corporate. Okay? This group has, I mean, they've been making billions, okay? They have been making billions. And turns out that Chaim Leibovitz is also very close to Avigdor Lieberman, the head of the right-wing Yisrael Beatenu Party, who is a regular fixture in the office of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So, now enter, we have a little issue, I'm trying to get to it here, that came up here in 2016, okay? And what that was a big fat bribe, okay, out of a hedge fund called Oak Zif. And this broke in 2016, September of 2016, and there was a $100 million bribe that was paid out of Oak Zif. Now, Daniel Oak, who was the founder, has already been charged on a major securities violation for doing this. But they couldn't find the partner who actually did the funding. And then they did. Turned out it was Dan Gertler. And Dan Gertler is, of course, one of the primary names on the annex list of this executive order. All right. What was the modus operandi of Dan Gertler? Well, they would create offshore corporations, some in the Caymans, some in Vancouver, BC. And then they would launder the money through those organizations. Well, if you recall, there was another organization that was formed in Vancouver, BC called Uranium One.
Yes.
And Uranium One was formed by a fellow named Frank Giustra. And Frank Giustra began to make connections with Bill Clinton, of all people. And they went to Uzbekistan together. And they went to Uzbekistan to try to secure the rights. And by the way, a lot of this mining that's going on in Africa that Gertler's involved with is primarily diamonds, but also cobalt. Okay? Diamond and cobalt. Now, one of the people that's on the list is Gulnora Islamovna Karamova, the daughter of Karamov, who was the president of Uzbekistan at the time all this action took place with Frank Giustra and Bill Clinton. Now, this Karamov was a ruthless dictator who was known to boil his enemies alive.
Oh, my goodness.
Wow. And Frank Giustra and Bill Clinton went to him and said, we want to make this mining deal with you. And so Komarov paid Bill Clinton $100,000 right there just to recommend him to the UN. Just to recommend him.
Wow. And
so all of these deals are made. And so there was a backroom deal that was made. And this backroom deal that was made by Frank Giustra and a Russian group called ARMS. Okay? Now, ARMS is actually a state-owned. ARMS is a state-owned entity by the Russians that is involved in uranium mining, and they wanted to control the 20% of the uranium in the United States. Now, you have to remember that when you talk about a global market for anything, if you're talking about a global market for oil or a global market for uranium or a global market for natural gas, whatever, in the current global trade traffic, there's a gigantic pool, if you will, into which all the oil goes, whether it's from Saudi Arabia, from Alaska, from Oklahoma, from Russia. It makes no difference. It goes into that pool, and then everybody pays a per gallon price or per barrel price for that oil in that pool. So if you restrict one guy from putting oil into the pool, you can drive the price up because there's less oil, same demand, price goes up. So Russia wanted to control U.S. uranium. Well, just think, now you may not be able to take uranium out of the country, but if I own it, you can't touch it.
Right. That's right.
And that's exactly what happened out west when they grabbed control of this. We own it. You can't touch it. And you need to send in some people from the BLM with guns to make sure that nobody gets near it.
That's right.
So
this is deep.
What takes place is that this backroom deal is made between Uzbekistan, Russia, Armenia, and ARMS. And ARMS says, we want to buy. First, they bought a small percentage of Uranium-1 in Vancouver. And then Frank Justra, who held the majority shares, said, all right, we got to make a transaction here. So the transaction was that the Russians would buy out Justra's shares. However, there was off-the-books transactions that provided for Frank Justra moving $145 million of Russian money through his Vancouver bank account into the Clinton Foundation.
Wow. Wow.
And then Uranium-1 was sold to ARMS, and ARMS controlled 20% of the uranium in the United States.
Look at that.
Now, there are people who say, well, Hillary Clinton wasn't Secretary of the State at that time, so you can't really pin this on her. See here. If you look here in the executive order, right?
Yes, sir.
Corruption, right? Corruption. To be a current or former government official or a person acting for or on behalf of such an official who is responsible for or complicit in or has directly or indirectly engaged in, 1, corruption, which is defined as the misappropriation of state assets or the expropriation of private assets for personal gain, corruption related to government contracts, or the extraction of natural resources or bribery.
Wow. That's it.
It kind of lands right on top of Uranium-1, doesn't it?
Yes. Oh, this is deep.
It's kind of a hot potato. Here, you catch it. And so what President Trump has done here is he has moved with an executive order. Again, historically, maybe the most significant document to be signed by an American president since the Emancipation Proclamation. It has the capability of completely draining the swamp.
Yes, sir.
So when we talk about some of these processes now let's go through here. Let's go back for a minute to some of the things that you raised. I'm going to go back to Marcus Garvey. Okay.
Yeah, take your time.
Okay. With Marcus Garvey, you have a fellow that was engaged in, he was doing a lot of activism, okay, and black nationalism in Jamaica.
Yes.
And, this movement that he founded, to try to push forward this nationalism was probably a very straightforward event. Now, I remember reading a great deal about this guy when he was in and out of the country and the kinds of things he went through. And, of course, whenever you're talking about raising money to do any event, it's subject to the securities laws of the United States.
Yes.
And, again, as I mentioned in the opening of the program, Bishop, when you have the super wealthy get their money, and then they want to close the gate behind them. And the securities laws are all about that, right? We got our money doing some kind of a private placement amongst wealthy friends at some beach property. But if you want to do that, well, there's a $250,000 registration process. You're going to have to get a couple of accountants involved. You need to hire a couple of firms that are going to run you $100,000 each in order to develop the funding. Then we're going to bring in our venture guys to take at least 60% of the transaction. And at the end of the day, you might walk out with 7-8%, and you got maybe your claim to fame, but you're not getting any money.
Right.
And so, so you see a guy like Marcus Garvey says, okay, well, I want to create this shipping line, this Black Star line. I want to create the shipping line, and I had a number of other ideas. We're all, of course, entrepreneurial ideas, but I'm sorry, that's a securities violation. And so this is what they destroyed him with, was this idea of securities fraud. whether or not they had jurisdiction. Look at this. Look what happened with Michael Flynn. Michael Flynn gets indicted for lying to Pete Strzock. Now, Pete Strzock is totally defamed right now. Him and his girlfriend, that with whom he's having an extramarital affair. And really the whole upper echelon of the FBI, which has now been fired. And there's a mass resignations expected tomorrow as they prepare to release all of the emails that were found on Anthony Weiner's laptop.
Okay. Oh, awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. And
this is awesome.
So what you see here is oftentimes you see people targeted for their political views. Now, when you look at what Martin Luther King was doing, okay, now let's talk about Martin Luther King for a little bit. Because
yes,
I think this is important, Bishop. I think you and I have to have a heart-to-heart on this, on Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King said some things in the I Have a Dream speech that are so critically important today.
Yes.
And how I wish that this country could develop the colorblindness he talked about. He said some very important things that were so critical to civil rights and so critical to who we are and who we need to be as Americans.
Right.
Now, with that being said, you dig into somebody's past, you're going to find a sinner. Right? As Paul said, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. There is no one good, not one. Right? Even Mashiach said that. There is no one good but the Father.
Right.
And so we see that in human life there are human frailties, and there are things that people do to try where the end justifies the means, or so they believe the end justifies the means. Now, was Martin Luther King flirting with communists? Sure he was. And were there many communists that were that had infiltrated the movement? Sure there were. But you have to remember the Communist Party had infiltrated almost everything at that time. So that may have been the case. Was he a card-carrying member of CPUSA? I don't believe so. And and when you see that now, so the question is that, all right, people have questionable politics, people make questionable bedfellows, and we're told not to be unequally yoked with other people. But what do you know and when did you know it? That kind of a thing. Nonetheless, I don't think it detracts from the work of Martin Luther King, what he did, what he said, and what he stood for, and what that means to Americans even today. You compare that to the Nation of Islam, for instance, and the kind of destructive power it's had. And so these are important things for us to see, and for the African American community to see, because there is a path of righteousness that is open to all of the house of Yasharel. It's open to all, and it does not include the Quran.
Right.
So
that's it.
With that, very important part. So I think to try to see what had happened there. Does it look like he was set up and taken down? Probably. Can I speak to the propriety of everything he was doing? I mean, look, when you're talking about some of the things he was doing, like creating a return to Africa. Africa is an extremely difficult place. It's an extremely difficult place, and in many cases, the people that are here in the United States were brought here at the hand of the Father, who said, "I want you here, not there."
That's right.
It's an important thing to remember. It's very important. Okay. So now, all right. Now, but let's dig into some of the some of the counterintelligence stuff, right? Can we go there? All right.
Absolutely.
So with counterintelligence, now, I'll tell you, the counterintelligence movement, people totally underestimate counterintelligence. They underestimate it today, and they underestimate those people who are engaged in counterintelligence. So we have this little proposition that's talked about in Daniel 12, where it says, Knowledge shall increase, and people shall go to and fro. We have reached that age. We have reached that age where knowledge is not only increasing, it's exploding. And it's exploding at such a rate, they're saying that by 2020, information will be doubling every 10 hours.
Wow.
Well, in the middle of that comes disinformation. And it seems like the disinformation is doubling as fast as the information. And you have all of these people who are plugging in all kinds of, a sideways story here and a sideways story there. And we get all this disinformation, and then it's hard to tell, well, what's the source of that? Where did that come from? Who put it out? And, if I were to tell you that probably, maybe 60 or 70% of the news sites you see posted up on Facebook that, Mr. Zuckerberg allows on all the time are people working full-time for the NSA and the CIA creating disinformation. They create a web page, spectacularnews.com. And then here comes the story. Nancy Pelosi eats her own foot off while trapped in a refrigerator, right? And that comes from
Teacher.
Some story like, B-17 seen orbiting the moon, right?
Yes. I would love to see that.
And,
or Maxine Waters goes bald.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's not so untrue. But you get these spectacular stories from a spectacular site that doesn't exist. It was created that morning by some CIA disinformation officer who's paid daily to create this stuff. And so this stuff is just prolific, and so the disinformation continues and continues and continues. Now, there's something that broke today that my good friend Martha was discussing with me before we came on, which was that the Imran brothers, two brothers who were working at this situation with the Imran brothers is absolutely incredible and beyond the pale. They had access to all of the classified information that was in the hands of the Democratic National Committee through Debbie Wasserman Schultz. They had access to all of it. And it turns out they were in the United States on forged documents.
Oh, my God. Look at that.
So you have two Pakistani intelligence officers here in the country on forged documents with access to everything. Now, the DNC says, the Russians colluded with Julian Assange to, somehow hack into Hillary Clinton's laptop and her BlackBerry that she had protected with this moronic password and no other protection whatsoever. When she had, they had given this information openly to Pakistani intelligence, right? The stuff was immediately downloadable through the back doors of the NSA and through the back doors of the FBI that every intelligence agency in the world knew through Vault 7.
Yes.
So, how do you possibly say that somebody colluded to do that? And at any rate, the point is when you talk about counter intel, let me give you an example of counter intel. This COINTELPRO. Pro.
Right.
In the 1960s. Okay. So you had the Secretary of State, John Dulles, and his brother, Alan Dulles, who was running the CIA at the time that George Bush was seen in Daley Plaza during the shooting of JFK, where Alan Dulles had just stepped down. But there was a doctrine that was adopted by the CIA. Again, remember, a Nazi Fourth Reich establishment. There was a doctrine that was established by this group called chaos. Now, you remember the old Get Smart show, right? Where Get Smart would go to all the doors, and his arch enemy was the evil group Chaos.
Right.
I used to love that show, actually.
Yeah,
I loved it when he dropped the cone of silence down, right? But at any rate, here's
Yes.
get smart fighting chaos, right? Well, chaos was actually a doctrine that was developed by the CIA in 1959, and they wanted to create as much chaos in American society as they possibly could in order to have an excuse to increase federal power.
Yes.
And, of course, that's really what you see with all the false flags that have happened since. I mean, that was really the impetus during the Barack administration when they set off the false flag at Sandy Hook, when they set off the false flag at the Boston Marathon, when they set off the false flag, at these various shooting events. All of those events were designed to enhance federal power, to increase the tyrannical throes of the state. Okay, so in order to do this, they used a lot of counter-intel programs in the 60s. Now, to give you an example, and not to defame people, but some of these CIA operatives included Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead, and this was published in 1973 in the Rolling Stone, that in fact he was working for the CIA. I mean, how does this guy get up in front of 40 policemen and distribute $25,000 worth of illegal drugs from buckets from the stage? And there's no arrest. They wanted him there doing that, right? And then you had, of course, the two notorious guys who were working for the CIA as counter-intel, which was Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman.
Yes.
Now, those names might not seem familiar to many people, but they were the founders of a group called the Yippies, and Abby Hoffman was famous for writing a book called Steal This Book, and how he basically would tell people how to steal everything, how you could get on a plane and fly for free and, shoplift and steal this and steal that, steal a car.
Right.
They stopped the publishing of it because all the copies were being stolen. And then, of course, Jerry Rubin, who wrote the book Do It, in which case he was advocating just pure rioting for anarchy and nothing else. And so you see, by pushing that gambit, by pushing that particular paradigm into the counterculture movement at that time, they opened the door for what would ultimately become the Democratic Convention of 1968, which was this gigantic riot in Chicago. And, during that convention, these guys literally walked down the aisle with a coffin full of buttons and dumped the coffin full of buttons out on people, right, in the floor. And the kinds of riot that was going on out in Chicago at that time was, it was just outrageous. Buses were, it was about, 100 times worse than anything Antifa has even considered doing. And it was all, of course, sponsored by the CIA, encouraged by the CIA, funded by the CIA.
Right.
And so you would see eyewitnesses that were talking at Berkeley, for instance, and you'd see the eyewitnesses saying, well, look, we were sitting here going to school, and all of a sudden buses of people would come in, contractors would come in with trucks, and they'd build platforms for these other people who were bussed in to put up their PA system and then give all this anti-war rhetoric and pretend like they were Berkeley students when no one had ever seen them before. How is it that happened? You don't do that without funding. And so what you see was you saw a lot of covert operations that were taking place with the CIA intentionally being at war with the United States. Now, it's the same thing with the FBI. And you get this, I don't know, you remember DeLorean, the fellow who built the car for Back to the Future?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah, John DeLorean, yeah. Now, John DeLorean, he built this car for GM, and GM said, that's fine. We're going to build it for a year or two, maybe. No, we're not going to build it at all. So he left the company, and he went to Ireland and started building the car. And he raised money, again, to build it, and they started hunting him down on securities fraud. And so as they did that, he came forward, and he had a great lawyer at the time, and his lawyer proved entrapment. Now, entrapment is when the government comes to you and says, hey, why don't you commit this crime? Well, I don't want to commit the crime. Well, why don't you? Here, we'll give you all the tools. Why don't you go ahead and commit it? Then you commit it, and they arrest you.
Right.
They just love it.
And they're still doing it.
And every now and then you'll get a judge who will say, well, that's entrapment. We're not going to let you get away with it. To give you an example, Ruby Ridge, the Randy Weaver story was just such a case. I mean, Randy Weaver moved up to some, cabin in the hills, and he wanted to live up there in the cabin in the hills, and that was that. But there was an ATF fellow there that wanted to sell him this illegal shotgun. Here, why don't you buy this? No, well, I don't want to buy it. Well, why don't you buy it? Look, it's a good shotgun. It does this, that, but the barrel was 2 inches too short. I don't want it. Don't want it. Don't want it. Well, here, buy it. The guy spends a year talking him into buying the shotgun. When he finally buys the shotgun, they get this warrant, this stale, stagnant warrant, and the warrant's of no good, but that doesn't stop them. They go up and surround the cabin, and they're going to assassinate him for failing to appear at a hearing. They shoot his dog first. God. So everybody retreats into the cabin. They retreat into the cabin, and Randy Weaver is flashing out in what do they call it? Whatever it is. It wasn't smoke signals. It's the other one. But he was flashing with the mirror saying, they're lying. Right. Well, I think 2 or 3 days into it, his wife goes to the front door holding the baby in her arms, and an FBI sniper shoots her in the head holding the baby and kills her right there.
Oh, no. Oh, my God.
Now, they ruled that was a wrongful act on the part of the FBI agent, but he was never sanctioned for what he did, never. And all of this on a setup, on an entrapment setup. And Randy Weaver was, of course, exonerated. But that escalated into other things. It escalated into the burn down at Waco, where they could have arrested David Koresh anytime they wanted in downtown Waco. Instead, they wanted to burn the place down and kill everybody in it. And when they did that, by the way, I want to talk about this for just a second. There were 52 women and children hunkered down in a buried bus. And that bus, they had built a tunnel underground from the basement through a door, and then they had a tunnel going underground to the doors of the bus, and then they had the 2 ventilator shafts up either side of the bus to get fresh air circulating to the bus. So when the firefight broke out, all the women and children fled to the bus. Well, the FBI went there and put telescopes down the stacks, so they had cameras watching them, and they had microphones so that they could hear and see everything. After the firefight started, CAT-IN bladed the tunnel so they couldn't escape the bus, and they pumped CS gas, banned by the Geneva Convention, right through those ventilator shafts and killed all 53 of those women and children. Then set the thing on fire and then bladed the evidence. Under the command of and at the direct order of Hillary Clinton.
Oh, my God. Wow. Oh. Wow. And you know what, Dr. Pidgeon? This I remember. Oh, my God. You're blowing my mind. You are blowing my mind. We touched on that I can't get this company out of my mind, SERCO, And I was reading someplace, and I want to go back to Marcus Garvey and also this COINTELPRO, because you are awakening me and our staff here and all of our listeners worldwide to another level. And I want to touch on the term chaos theory as well. We have Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, world-renowned author, attorney, America's #1 political scientist, here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. Continue to send your questions in to Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. Again, beloved, Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. This Chris Hyman, the former CEO of SERCO, and mind you, SERCO is a major corporation there in London, England. And this Chris Hyman was then the CEO during the time of 9/11, where he had a breakfast meeting at the top of the North Tower. And this breakfast meeting was sponsored by a group that was owned at the time covertly by members of MI6, but also in connection to George Soros, and that group was called the Risk Waters Group in London, England, which is a financial based company that studies risk analysis, whose stock went up the following day after 9/11. And so this Chris Hyman all of a sudden has to leave, okay, this breakfast meeting at the 106th floor of the North Tower, and he conveniently gets on an elevator and goes down to the 47th floor 15 minutes before the first jet hits the tower. I cannot help but to think, man of God, this cannot be by accident. And to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, if you get an opportunity, go to www.serco.com. Again, serco.com. And that company is located, like I said, in England, in the town of Hook, Hampshire, England, on Bartley Way. And so this Christopher Hyman, very interesting, is a very interesting character. But I'm doing some more digging, and we're talking about the secret history of the American shadow government from JFK to 2017. Man of God, you are blowing my mind. But this SERCO company originally was not called SERCO, but in 1929 was founded by a man by the name of David Sarnoff, whose family today are proxy owners of NBC. I kid you not. You won't see it officially on the internet, but the Sarnoff family unofficially owns the National Broadcasting Network. So this David Sarnoff, who was born in Minsk, Russia, interesting, in February the 27th, 1891, created a company by the name of the RCA Company. I find that to be interesting. And David Sarnoff, through this RCA company, created a system called the Marconi wireless telegraph system, which gave the wrong codes of direction for the Titanic. You made mention of the Titanic. Man, I'm so excited tonight. You made mention of the Titanic, and those people, most of these famous people that were on that ship, John Jacob Astor, Margaret Brown, these are the high society people, the upper bourgeoisie of New York City during that time. Going back to the 1912, Benjamin Guggenheim. These people were totally against, including Isidor Straus. Remember the Levi Strauss family. These people were against the creation of the Federal Reserve. Doctor, I'm telling you, this is, man of God, ever since you began to teach us this series, you're taking me to another level. So this David Sarnoff, who created this RCA, which was a patent monopoly company, created this Marconi wireless telegraph system that sent signals to the Titanic, and that the Titanic, thinking that they're going in the way away from the iceberg, okay? But in actuality, this system told a lie, to the captain of the Titanic, Captain Edward John Smith, and they ran right into the iceberg. And I cannot help but to think that the insurance company, who at the time insured the Titanic for $5 million, was a company out of London by the name of the Willis Faber Company, who also insured many decades later the Federal Building in Oklahoma City in the Twin Towers in Manhattan. Man of God, this is wicked. These dots together. And so getting back to the passengers on the Titanic, they were totally against the creation of the Federal Reserve. And this Wallace Faber Company was 89.9, almost 90% owned by J.P. Morgan. And so, I cannot help but to think that the following year, in 1913, on Jekyll Island, the Federal Reserve System is created. That's
right.
Man of God, this is dumb. I'm going to say one more thing, and you just take over. But I believe in the 1990s, and again, forgive me for going all of the map here. We're going to get back to the COINTELPRO, the Black Panthers, and Marcus Garvey here in a few minutes in Ruby Ridge. But it's very interesting that Bill Clinton, during the 1990s, created what they call the Federal Bridge Certification Authority Network, okay, which was a computer network based on creating fake news by hiring crisis actors to create fake news and manufacture terrorist events. And you talked about the Boston bombing, you know. And so this Bill Clinton, through the Federal Bridge Certification Authority Network, created, you know, you're talking about not just Ruby Ridge, you're talking about Sandy Hook, you know. And again, I don't mean to be so insensitive, and to the parents out there, please hear me. I don't mean to be so insensitive, okay? A tragedy is a tragedy, but there are crisis actors. Every time it was under Barack Obama's administration, correct me if I'm wrong, man of God, because a wise man receives correction. Every single time during the 8 years of the Obama administration that there was some type of shooting on a high school campus or a college campus or even in an elementary school, it provided a national distraction from what was going on. And man of God, and I believe President Trump is ordained by God to expose this. So quickly here, this SERCO, they own one of the largest security firms, not just in England, but in Europe, by the name of G4S. I believe I lightly touched on this a couple of weeks ago, which this G4S security company was in Las Vegas during the time of this so-called Paddock shooting. And it's interesting that the Orlando nightclub shooter, Omar Mateen, was a former employee of G4S. And so I find that to be so interesting. Go ahead, Doctor. Oh, this is powerful.
Well, let's crack this just a little bit farther. If you recall,
yes,
we talked about the underwear bomber, the fellow who gave us all the electronic scanners in the airports, right? And this fellow was able to pay cash for a one-way ticket with no passport, being on a terrorist watch list, and was nonetheless able to get on a 747 in Amsterdam. Okay.
Right.
Well, SERCO operates the National Border Targeting Center for UK visas and immigration and provides the sole carrier gateway, the interface between carriers and the agency itself. It also controls transport services in Scotland. It controls the Dutch national rail operator, Netherlands Spoorwegen, which operates passenger trains in the UK. It operates in Liverpool. It operates in Ireland. And it also controls all of the speed cameras in the UK. And, you know, they have so many cameras in the UK, it's unbelievable. I mean, in London, you can't go anywhere without being on a camera. And they also they control the emergency roadside telephones, all the message signs, the signals in the National Traffic Control Center. That's all SERCO. So what you see is a company that is pervasive and invasive. And so who do you think arranged for the underwear bomber to get on that plane? And so when you see these events coming, so we start pointing at SERCO and we start saying, okay, what now? SERCO, its close neighbor. Now you mentioned that SERCO was the underlying owner of NBC, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Oh no, it was actually yes, they are today. Go right ahead. I'm sorry.
Now compare that to the group that bought out half of RCA's interest in 1987. At the time that SERCO formed, the other half went to General Electric. And General Electric owns all the rest of the media except for the media owned by Sheikh bin Talal.
Teach, man of God. That's it. Wow.
So we have to teach data.
No one has ever heard of this company before, SERCO. Go ahead, man of God. Interesting.
Right. I agree. Now, it's interesting because, of course, we did a lot of work out here trying to block the red light cameras from coming into the state of Washington. And we failed because, of course, the courts wanted it. And so what you see here is that these cameras come in. Now, the camera systems mostly in the United States are owned by Goldman Sachs, not by SERCO. But I'll guarantee you will see an interface between SERCO and Goldman Sachs. And so you see things like, for instance, in Britain, SERCO supplies all the electronic tagging devices for the offenders and asylum seekers. They control the immigration removal centers. They control the sexual abuse systems, and so on and so forth. And so what you're seeing is they control the gateways. Now, this is an important biblical concept because one of the blessings that's proclaimed in the Torah is that you will control the gateways. Well, it's a well-known fact in the inner circles, the method that you use for changing a society, whether you're John Dewey and you're trying to change it to Fabian socialism, or you're Hillary Clinton and you're trying to change it over to an international socialism, or whatever. But the key thing is you have to control the gateways. Now, if you look right now, you will see, to give you an example, you have a gateway in every courthouse. Okay, that's called the court clerk.
Yes.
The court clerk is totally unaccountable. Most people don't know what the clerk's name is. The clerk doesn't get elected. The clerk's just there. In some states, the clerk does get elected. But in most places, they don't know who the clerk is. And the clerk is the one who takes your pleading and throws it in the trash or files it. The clerk is the one who can go to the filing cabinet, pull out your file, and shred it when you need it, and then claim there's no case number. You have no recourse against this person at the gate. The person who sits at the gate in your private employment sits in HR. HR has particular protocols. Well, do you support transgender bathrooms? Well, no, I'd like to have privacy in my bathroom. Well, I'm sorry, you're not of a hireable quality here. That's the HR person making that decision, and the HR people sit in the gateway. And do you know who they are? You can't go to the CEO, go to the board meeting, go to the board of directors, the president, the vice president, whoever, and say, hey, I want to complain. No, it's the person in HR who is scanning for political correctness, who is scanning for proper indoctrination, who is scanning to make sure that you were brainwashed in college sufficiently to be able to hold this position. And if it's not that person at that gateway, then it's the person at the college. Well, you need to apply here to get in. And we're going to take a look at your application to see if you're a proper fit. And they tell you, it's a blind application. We just look at your GPA and this, that, and the other thing. No, they don't. They pull up your Facebook page. They pull up your Twitter account. They pull up your Snapchat, your Instagram, and they're looking at all of this to see who you are. And if you do not meet the scanning protocols, you're not invited in. And so you see that the gatekeepers in the United States have been completely overthrown. And as what we can see now by looking at SERCO, the gatekeepers in Britain have been completely overthrown by this organization called SERCO, who controls every gate from the door the immigrant enters to the door the student enters to the door the driver enters to the door the lawyer enters to the door the traveler enters. They control all of it.
My God.
You
may mention the Goldman Sachs. I think the servers of Goldman Sachs, they were transferred to London.
They committed
the day before 9/11.
And there was so much information flying around. And, there were certain people who were dancing in New Jersey as the towers were burning. You know that.
Right. I heard about that. Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah. And, of course, the owner was looking at his insurance proceeds coming in, and he knew those proceeds were going to come in. The only people that didn't know were the 3,000 people in the building and the hundreds of firefighters who gave their life at the bottom of the building. And, of course, let's talk about 9/11 for just a moment.
Go ahead. Go right ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead. I'm excited.
Well, you know that, Fort Knox used to hold our gold reserves. But in 1981, 100% of the gold was transferred out of Fort Knox to the basement of the World Trade Center.
Wow.
Now, let's talk about this for a minute. Here you have a situation where President Trump has come forward and said, I find it to be a national emergency. People who have been in a government position, a government official, or associated with a government official, think that they have the right to sell assets belonging to the government and put the money in their own pocket.
Right.
Well, if you recall, there was an initial bombing of the World Trade Center that happened when? Do you remember this? The Blind Sheik?
1993?
93.
Oh, yes.
Now, let's see.
Yes, sir.
In January 21st of 1993, something happened. And that something happened was the installment of Bill Clinton, right?
Uh-huh.
And the power and authority of that office being wielded by his wife. And the next thing you know, there's a bombing in the World Trade Center. Gee, let's have a bombing. Where? Oh, in the basement of the World Trade Center.
Jeez, doctor. That's it. And you know what?
Why would you do that? Well, that's where the gold is, right?
Oh, that's it. And this woman keeps popping up on the radar. Her name is Christine Marcy. Now, I wish we had time to talk about her. Maybe next time. But this Christine Marcy, who was put in charge by both George Bush and later Barack Obama, and they claim she killed herself, but actually she's still alive. She was put in charge of the National Visa Center, and the U.S. National Visa Center was outsourced by the U.S. government just prior to 9/11 to SERCO. Why in God's name would the United States government, through their front person, Christine Marcy, along with then newly elected Senator Hillary Clinton, outsource this U.S. National Visa Center? And these 19 hijackers, I don't know, 15, 16 of them were Saudi nationals. All of their passports were fraudulent, and I wonder why. Why? Because this National Visa Center that was outsourced to SERCO, really? And I find that to be interesting. But you know what, Doctor? SERCO also runs the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office in Alexandria, Virginia. Why? Why would the U.S. outsource both its U.S. National Visa Center and their U.S. Patent and Trademark Office? I find that to be interesting. Go ahead, Doctor. Oh.
Well, again, it comes back to the same reason over and over again. You isolate the asset belonging to the U.S. government, move it out of the control of anybody left in the government who has any integrity who would oversee it, and then transfer it and sell it through a third-party transaction that has the money in your bank account, the asset gone, and somebody in the middle is the fall person. And then if anybody talks, the person who knows, shoot him.
That's it. That's it. And this Christine Marcy, she was the head of this, what they call this asset forfeiture fund, I believe for the State Department. And she had used part of these funds to hire contracting companies that did demolition work, a.k.a. the levees during Hurricane Katrina were blown up because of this Christine Marcy. This is demonic. This is, I'm telling you, man of God, you're causing me to dig. And, at the time, just before 9/11, I find this to be so interesting. You're talking about Hillary Clinton. I'm so happy that you're bringing her up. She was a patent attorney. I think I touched on this last time when you were on the air. Before she became First Lady, She was a patent attorney for the Rose Law Firm in Little Rock, Arkansas. And one of the companies they represented was a company by the name of BEI Sensors they're now located in Thousand Oaks, California. But right before 9/11, they created what they call the QRS-11 gyro chip, which was a chip to be put in most of the Boeing 747s, so that when this chip was implanted, this QRS-11 gyro chip, that plane could be remotely controlled. And guess whose name is on the patent, amongst other names? Hillary Clinton. Oh, man, she is absolutely evil. And her husband, and correct me if I'm wrong, man of God, but a wise man receives correction. There was a general that President Clinton chose to be on his Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I might be mispronouncing his last name. General John Shashkavelli, I believe that's his name, capital SHALIKASHVILI, Shashkavelli. I might be mispronouncing his name. But this General John Shashkavelli, he is the son of the former Waffen SS officer, Dmitry Shashkavelli. But yet his son, John Shashkavelli, was chosen by President Bill Clinton in the mid-'90s to be on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It's just,
where you get an overt...
There are no bounds to the wicked. Go ahead, man of God. Oh, this is powerful.
There isn't. You get an overt infiltration of the Reich right into the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Yeah.
And, it's not quite so overt in Congress, but believe me, there are Fourth Reich members in the House of Representatives and Fourth Reich members in the U.S. Senate. And, what you're bringing up, and you've raised some very interesting names here, and I don't want to go into too much detail into those names, Bishop. Some of those names have some incredible evil associated with them. Incredible amounts of evil associated with them. But if you recall, to give you an example of some of the tainting, okay?
Yes.
You recall that Bill Clinton at one point gathered up all the blood. He started a blood gathering drive in the prisons in Arkansas. And he took all of this blood from the prisons in Arkansas and he sold it to Canada. No screening, no testing, no nothing. Canada introduced the blood into its blood supply, and they had over 30,000 people come down with HIV.
Oh, my God.
And so the Canadian government had to spend a lot of money, balancing this out and taking care of it. But Bill Clinton had felt no qualms about selling HIV blood out of his prisons into Canada. Didn't bother him at all. And there are things along those lines. And so what you see when we haven't cracked the nut here into the real difficulty, but the executive order does. Right. Because it looks at human trafficking, sex trafficking, prisoner trafficking, guns trafficking, arms trafficking. All of these things were going on publicly and privately, and the money was being laundered through the Clinton administration, and the Clintons were directly in. So you have two major scandals at the Clinton administration or the Clinton Foundation. One is the money from Frank Giustra, which it's very clear that the money came from arms in a third-party transaction. And then Arms bought out Frank Giustra. Frank Giustra put $145 million in the Clinton Foundation funds at the time that Hillary Clinton was a senator of the United States. Very clear. That's a very clear, obvious trail. Now, there was an additional $2 billion that was scheduled to go to Haiti in the relief fund following the earthquake, which many people also believe was an orchestrated quake. And that money ended up in the Clinton coffers, and no money ended up in Haiti at all. And what money was spent in Haiti was spent gathering up children out of the orphanages and selling them in Washington, D.C., as part of Pizzagate. And so, when you start talking about the child trafficking and the kinds of things that these people were doing privately, publicly, they admit to spirit cooking. And if you look up spirit cooking on the internet, you're going to discover just how disgusting it truly is. But publicly, they admit to doing spirit cooking. Privately, there's a lot more going on. There's child sacrifice going on.
Right.
There's drinking blood. There's eating children, eating their organs. There is, these children being trafficked. There is satanic rituals that have taken place all over the country, including Bohemian Grove, of course. That's just the most obvious.
Yes.
But you've had these rituals that have taken place all over. There's Jeffrey Epstein's, pedophile island.
Yes.
And the 26 trips that Bill Clinton took, and the 5 trips that Hillary took, and so you have there's a ton of indicia of mafia money, of all of this trafficking, of wholesale corruption, using your public office to facilitate your own wealth by selling the public trust. And the fact that there were people in the FBI and there were people in the Justice Department and there were people in Congress that were willing and knowingly took money from the Democratic National Committee and money from private sources, funneled it through a law firm in my town, Seattle. That law firm then hired Fusion GPS to create a fake story. They created the fake story. They knew they created it. They paid for it to be created, and then they brought it back to this country for the purposes of overthrowing a duly elected president of the United States. And they acted in concert with one another all the time. No, CNN admitted point blank, we know it's fake, but it's getting us ratings.
Right. It's sick.
Well, it now has criminal implications.
Yes.
It is sick.
Oh, my God. Oh, man, I see the mainstream media. We were talking about CNN, ABC, MSNBC, CBS. Excuse me. I'm telling you, I have never seen this type of fake news on this scale. But, man of God, they're falling. They're going to fall. You know what? And you brought something to my mind. Again, concerning Bill Clinton, I think back in the early 90s, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill Clinton, through this Christine Marcy, had created what they call the United States Justice Prisoner and Alien Transportation System. Now, remember the movie that came on some years ago called Con Air?
Con Air, yeah.
And so that, yes, with Nicolas Cage. So that movie was kind of the template for this United States Justice Prisoner and Alien Transportation System, where they would take a lot of these hardened criminals to certain countries, to rape children, to molest children for the demonic sacrifices. You talking about Diego Garcia, one of these locations, and man of God, this is. Our time is running down, but I want to get with this Marcus Garvey, and forgive me for going all of the math. J. Edgar Hoover, he did not have a love for black people, and back in October 1919, J. Edgar Hoover, who was a special assistant to the Attorney General, and head of the General Intelligence Division, or what they call the Anti-Radical Division. You talk about COINTELPRO, and this was a precursor for the BOI, the Bureau of Investigation. Then in 1935, the FBI is born. But there were people on the board of Marcus Garvey's organization, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, or the UNIA, who was hired by the United States government, interesting, to neutralize Marcus Garvey. And that Marcus Garvey at the time was one of the biggest threats, as he was, called an enemy combatant before there was such a term during that time. And that term came into being after 9/11. But many people on his board. You're talking about that black line, that Black Star line ship, and you said something I didn't know before, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't like to be misquoting people where, you have to pay $200,000 up front and whatnot. But these black line ships Garvey had bought were also insured by the same insurance company, Willis Faber, who also insured the Titanic, who also insured the Twin Towers, a.k.a. Larry Silverstein. I'm telling you, this is wicked. So this Marcus Garvey, now there is a rumor in the black community, and it's been a rumor for, oh my God, maybe many decades. I'm not saying this is true or authentic, but the great Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois was used by the United States government to help bring down Marcus Garvey. I can't prove that. I don't know. I don't know if this is a fact at all. So if someone out there in global spiritual revolution land can really do a historical search on how the connection between Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey. And it's interesting, the grandson of Malcolm X, who was murdered back in October 10th, 2014. Malcolm Shabazz, who was the 28-year-old grandson of Malcolm X, he was murdered by men who had connections with the owner, Carlos Slim, the owner of the New York Times, the billionaire. And again, I'm not bashing Latino people, but Carlos Slim, who's a billionaire, who is a proxy owner of the New York Times, these men that had killed the grandson of Malcolm X, Malcolm Shabazz, worked for one of the companies that's connected to Carlos Slim. And it's interesting because, excuse me, in our remaining minutes is that I believe last time you touched on the Black Panther Party. Huey Newton, I don't know if he was taken out because of a drug deal or if the CIA did. I just don't know. But all of these dots put together, man of God, you have taken us to a new level here tonight as we are closing out here and talking about the secret history of the American shadow government from JFK to 2017. Oh, my God. Any lasting words? Man, this is exciting.
Well, I would just say that as we look at what's happening now, we have this most explosive thing on the horizon. And I think if you look closely at the day-to-day news, you're seeing that the plug has been pulled at the bottom of the swamp, and the swamp is draining.
Yes.
And as it drains, you're going to see, there have been a plethora of CEOs resigning from all of these major corporations, including Eric Schmidt out of Google, took off. And you're seeing all these CEOs resign, and you're also starting to see this major leadership in the FBI is starting to fold. These guys are running for cover now. Their whole frontline cover troops have been exposed from the backside. And as they've been exposed from the backside, now with this emergency order in place, these people need to understand that the president is very serious about what he's talking about, and the game of telling a lie about Russian collusion and doing all this other stuff, it could result in major criminal charges coming against you for engaging in this kind of garbage. Now, Sheikh bin Talal, the last I heard, was hanging from his feet in a hotel in Riyadh, and there are reasons why these things are going on. The people who have been engaged in creating the Nazi state in this country, and let's face it, we live in a surveillance state under the Patriot Act that violates the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth, and the Sixth, and is a total deprivation of liberty. And yet it continues.
Right. Oh my God. This is you're blowing my mind, man of God. I just, I'm at a loss for words because your knowledge, and to our global spiritual revolution partners, we have with us the number one political scientist in this nation and one of the most powerful political figures of truth around the world, and that is the Honorable Dr. Stephen Pidgeon. Oh, my God. Part 3 of the Secret History of the American Shadow Government from JFK to 2017, only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. And in our remaining seconds, man of God, this Jerusalem vote, I mean, I need some help on this regard because I don't understand why. I don't understand why. How can a sovereign nation like Israel can't establish their own capital? What right does France and the United Kingdom and Spain? These are the allied powers that we got them out of a jam in World War II, and now all of a sudden, wait a minute, I got to come to you for permission to create a capital? Or what say you, man of God? Oh.
It's a spiritual issue. The people of Israel do not need to ask, but they will continue to ask as long as their king is Caesar. The true king, the Messiah, awaits. And the day will come when they will mourn over him whom they have pierced. When that day comes, there will not be any conflict over Jerusalem.
Man, oh, man. And you know what? I love Ambassador Nikki Haley. I believe she will be the first female president probably in 8 years or 16 years down the road. I really believe that. But I agree with President Trump. We got to start cutting funding, okay? No more free lunches, you know. We have
totally agree with that.
This is crazy. I mean, you know, we are paying 22% or $3.3 billion a year to the UN general budget and another 28% for the UN's peacekeeping budget. And what are we getting out of it? A no vote? No. It just makes no sense. And about NATO, we are oh my God, we are spending more than the 27 other countries combined. But what are we getting out of the deal? I think it's time for us to leave both the UN and the North American Trade Organization. What say you, man of God?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you. I favor pulling out of NATO myself and reorganizing ourselves. Yes. There's been a lot of written about the United States readdressing our relationship with Russia, our natural ally, and by the way, with whom we were allied in defeating Germany in 1945. And we need to reconsider that alliance. And to restructure ourselves economically. And as for NATO, forget it. Turkey is already pulling out anyway, and they're the mainstay of the whole thing. And then if you put an army in Germany again, and you're going to find Germany doing what the